The history of financial markets and the history of investing is, as you know, very much a history of bubbles and a history of crashes. And, in some ways, a history of contrarians, of the people who are kind of able to get ahead of these big events and position their portfolios and then profit from it. So, to start off, I think the obvious question for you is, what period in history do you think is most apt today as we record this on November 24th, 2020?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that there's not one period, but multiple periods that, for me, are kind of similar to the stock market for the last few months. Obviously, there's no exact parallels, but
Right.
the periods I should say that I wrote about recently in one of my weekly newsletter posts is related to the kind of explosion in electric vehicle companies this year, and a trend I think you see throughout history is what Warren Buffett was quoted as calling the three I's: the imitators, or the innovators, the imitators, and the idiots. And there's actually an exact replica of that concept in an Economist article like 100 years before Buffett said it, which was fascinating to find. But the idea is essentially that you have one actually innovative company that comes out with an exciting new technology or something just new, flashy, and it's successful in the kind of first mover. And then after that, you get imitator companies, which might not be inherently bad just because they're copying the kind of model of the first mover, but they're definitely the kind of just imitator. And then eventually you have the idiots, which are usually kind of just full-blown grifters or examples of fraudulent companies that are trying to take advantage of a trend. And so one of these kind of first examples is in the 1690s, if you can believe it, in London's first stock market boom. This was actually the first kind of tech bubble. And what's interesting is it also was in the 90s, but not the 1990s as
Yeah.
we think of the tech bubble. And what happened there was you had a treasure hunt, if you can believe it, where this guy, Sir William Phipps, had heard that there was a sunken Spanish treasure ship off the coast of, I want to say Honduras, that had basically sunk on its way back to Spain and was rumored to have all this gold and jewels on board. And so eventually he decided that he was going to go search for this treasure and see if it was actually there. And so he went to London to get a kind of syndicate of investors, and they formed a joint stock company to invest and fund his expedition because he obviously needed to pay for supplies, etc. He goes, finds the ship, and he actually finds 32 tons of treasure on the ship, and it takes him 2 months to haul up all of the all of the treasure. And there was actually so much he couldn't bring it all back. But when he got back to London, his investors achieved a 10,000% return on their investment. It was something like £5,000 dividends for every £100 they put in. So it was absolutely ludicrous. And everyone in London who saw these just insane returns thought, I want to like get in on that. I want to find the next guy who's going to discover treasure and have these ludicrous returns. And so what you saw was this explosion in imitator companies, and there's a boom in technology for diving patents, like
Huh.
literally treasure hunting patents. And suddenly you had all these companies exploding that offered it was like the John Williams Diving Technology Company. And the thesis was basically, we came up with a weird diving apparatus that will allow you to breathe underwater longer. And quite simply, the thesis was, if you can do that, then you can hunt for treasure longer, which will increase your odds of finding treasure. And so there were all these companies that came out. I think there's something like 20% of all patents in the 2 years after this treasure hunt were related to diving technology, and none of them ever found anything. But I think that's just a first great example of
Yeah.
a super successful, innovative, and kind of sexy investment. People seeing that, and then an explosion in imitator companies. In an article I wrote on this topic, I compared it to like after Uber, there's the Uber for X. Like there's Uber for everything once
Oh, yeah.
Uber kind of burst onto the scene. There's like Uber for dog walking, Uber for haircuts, just anything. And again, none of those diving technology companies worked. No one ever replicated the original person's success. And there were tons of examples of fraud, where companies raised money for a technology patent, but then never even built a product or anything.